Bookman war on the colony and occupied more than a third of the colony. Every activity was stopped. Everybody had only one thing: find Bookman and stop this. And we had no weapons. They had the guns. They had the cannons. They had everything. And yet, the fear.
So Bookman, one of the great leaders, he was eventually captured. He was eventually killed. And when they got Bookman, they wanted to make an example out of Bookman so they could scare all the other people from rebelling. So the legend was they got Bookman's head, decapitated him, and put his head on a stick and put it out in the public so that everybody could see it as a way to scare them. But at this point, people got rid of that fear of dying. So the rumor was people would walk past the head, see the head and say, they would rub their head and say, we're going to carry on the revolution.
One of the fascinating things about the Haitian Revolution is how little pride human beings outside the African diaspora have taken in it, which is fascinating to me, because this is an event of universal human significance, the only successful slave revolution in the whole history of humanity. In all the millennia of slavery, they've been from Greece to Rome to the Ottomans to the Abbasids. No one's ever had a successful slave revolution.
The next Haitian leader who would take the revolution to the next level was the great Toussaint Louverture.
He was raised by a woman from Dahomey. A lot of our people who were born here learned to speak different African languages and got the history of the places that whoever was teaching them came from. Toussaint might not have been from Dahomey, but being that the African woman who adopted him here was from Dahomey, then he's trained and raised as a Dahomean.
If you come from Africa, you have a militaristic aspect to your environment. Dahomey, as we know today, Benin, was one of the most warlike culture. That's where we get the term Amazon women, Amazon warriors, because of the women warriors of Dahomey. On television, they make you think Amazon women come from someplace else. But these are you go to Benin and you can go to the museum and see statues of these women and so forth, these women warriors.
Toussaint is born on May 20th, has a very different, even in slavery, their experience is very different. He was a submissive person in slavery. He had slavers who kind of like him.
It was believed that Toussaint Louverture had been free from the age of 45. We now know he was free from about the age of 30. So he'd been a free, privileged African, if you like, in as much as that can be the case in a slave society, for quite a long time before the revolution. He was heavily Christian, he could read and write, he was very Europeanized, and in many ways that determined his leadership, his experience of slavery, which was said to be, say, less harsh than someone like Dessalines, and his being free for so long. He constantly tried to placate or make peace with France.
Toussaint was an enslaved African who became a free African at some point in the process. I don't know whether he bought his way out of freedom or was granted manumission, because all of the slave society seemed to have put in place some process of manumission for the enslaved persons. And so he became a member of the French military. And he was the first African to become a general in the French military.
He became a great general. But what he's noted for is that before he even went into fighting, he made sure that his enslavers were off to America, okay, because he didn't kill them. And he always really had an affinity for the French.
He was operating in very difficult circumstances. I mean, it's not as if black people in Haiti had natural allies in the hemisphere. They had antagonists in the hemisphere. With regard to Cuba, which was controlled by the Spanish, that was an antagonist. With regard to Jamaica, controlled by the British, that was an antagonist. Of course, the United States was not altogether friendly. And then, of course, there was the French. And so he was maneuvering, aligning with one power against another power.
In 1802, Napoleon sent one of his generals, Charles Leclerc, over to Haiti so that he could try to bribe Toussaint into turning on some of the other Haitian leaders.
Early on in May 1802, he is speaking to Toussaint. He sent for Toussaint. Toussaint came, and in the room there were but 2 chairs, a table. On that table, 1 million francs. And he said to Toussaint, "This money is yours." And Toussaint said, "Well, what do I have to do for it?" He says, "Nothing. Just bring me Dessalines' head." Toussaint put both his arms on the money, and he says, "If it is Dessalines' head that you want, you may as well cut both my arms right now."
He also develops a mindset that I'm respected as a French successful soldier. And so it was to his detriment that he thought that the military relationship that the French had for French soldiers would allow him to survive their imprisonment. And they don't apply that military standard to African peoples.
Napoleon understood that Toussaint wanted to get that respect from the French. Toussaint really, really wanted that respect. Toussaint really wanted to be accepted by the French military. Toussaint wanted to be accepted by the French elite class. And Napoleon saw that, and Napoleon played on that.
So then little by little, Toussaint became the top guy here, period. Militarily and politically. And that's when he's going to do a constitution. He's going to have a constitution written and ban slavery. Of course, that was what brought his demise too. At that point, when Napoleon received the constitution that Toussaint produced here, he is vexed to the last degree and decide that Toussaint must die.
So Napoleon wrote letters to Toussaint inviting him to come over to France so they can negotiate, so they can talk. Napoleon stepped to Toussaint like, "We're the same. We're French generals. We're French military men. We're French." And Toussaint fell for that, and when Toussaint went over there, they captured him, put him in jail, and he died in jail. Now, Dessalines would not fall for that trick. He knew how brutal the white supremacists were.
And of course, you know the sad story of his end, how he goes thinking that he's going to negotiate with his French antagonists, and they arrest him and bundle him off to Europe, where he dies, and where, of course, he utters the immortal words that his death will not stop the revolutionary process. And in fact, he was correct, because it's carried on.
In the course of fighting Leclerc, who was the brother-in-law of Napoleon, who had come down to head one of the armies, Toussaint get captured. I think this is 1803 or 1802, 1803. And then he's taken to France, where he's really starved to death. They said he died of maybe tuberculosis. They starved him to death. And that's when Dessalines assumed the leadership of the army. At this point, the whites, who had now been given a kind of a republican freedom, wants the black folks to go back to the plantation, go back to your status quo. And Dessalines said that's not happening.
So Napoleon is known for exclaiming that it wasn't so much the economic adventure. He said we have to stop the forward movement of blacks in the world. Because remember, when he got into Egypt, and Count Volney wrote his book, Ruins of Empires, telling the French and telling the world, the very same people that we are enslaving and at war with in Haiti and Martinique and St. Lucia and Tobago are the very descendants of the people who built the pyramids that we are copying all their work.
Sent his brother-in-law Leclerc with the new expedition in February 1802 with a clear mission: capture the 10 black generals, send them to France. And once you do that, you could slaughter the entire population of blacks on the island. Don't worry, Africa still has plenty. We'll go back and get more.
Jean-Jacques, at the end of the day, he didn't like the idea of like Toussaint going to France, you know what I mean? It was like, yo, I'm telling you, this is not gonna work out. But in the dungeon though, Toussaint always says something, and they teach us this at a young age. And these are not the exact words, but this is the meaning of it. It's basically, I'm in this dungeon, you could do whatever you want with me, but the seeds already have been planted.
Rochambeau was a French military general, famous even by the standards of 18th century slavery for his incredible brutality. So when the French realized they cannot win back the island from these rebellious Africans, they decided to embark on a war of extermination. That was the official command. Just exterminate them and we'll replace them with new Africans. So to that end, Rochambeau was tasked with that extermination.
When we think about people being gassed as a form of genocide, the first thing we think about is Nazi Germany. But the first gassing did not happen in Nazi Germany. The first gassing happened in Haiti because the French knew that there was natural sulfur on the island of Haiti. So they got the sulfur. When you burn sulfur, it becomes poisonous. So during the fight, the French put thousands of Africans on ships off the shore, locked them in, and burned the sulfur, and the gases and the fumes killed thousands of people.
Most wicked, vicious, atrocious thing that ever walked on this island. If you wrote a book of 1,000 pages, you couldn't tell all the atrocities that this man performed here, and with pleasure.
Rochambeau, French general, very well respected, very evil, very demonic with the tactics that he used. Napoleon sent him over to Haiti to carry out the genocide campaign. The thing about Rochambeau not only disliked black people, Rochambeau disliked all the mulattoes too. He hated the mulattoes even more than he hated the blacks. So Rochambeau was a real piece of work.
He came into that port and he didn't reveal what he was going to do. And the people were really, really scared. And they held a festival for him. And it was a couple of days later when they were starting to feel, okay, this guy is not as bad as people have been saying, right? Then he invites them to this ball.
When Rochambeau came to the island, a lot of people didn't know what Rochambeau's agenda was. Nobody really knew anything about him at the time. So when he got to the island, people were kind of sitting back watching to see what he was going to do. So Rochambeau announced that he's going to have a ball, this big party, this grand gala, for all the wives of the mulatto soldiers. So at this ball, at this gala, they have this big, luxurious party where they're wining and dining the mulatto free women. You know, they got drinks, they got music, they got food. They're really partying and living it up. The French generals are there, the mulatto women are there, everybody's just mingling, having a good time. So Rochambeau makes an announcement that he wants to have the women follow him in another room in the house. So he walks down the hallway with the women following him. The women are just, you know, going along with the vibe, going along with the program, going along with the party. They don't know what's happening. They're still giddy, laughing, giggling. Once they get in this other room, Rochambeau announces to the women, hey, I got presents for all of you. So there are these boxes lined up. And there's different variations of this story, but this is the most popular one. So Rochambeau has all of these boxes of presents lined up for the women. So the women are, you know, they're still in a festive party mood, but now they're confused. So they see these boxes and they see Rochambeau announcing that he's giving them gifts. So the women are like, okay, cool. So the women get the boxes, and when they open the boxes, they look inside and they see the decapitated heads of their husbands inside the boxes. So the women are terrified. Rochambeau's standing there laughing, giggling, just laughing his head off, because he's letting them know, I don't care about the blacks or you mulattoes, and this is what I'm going to do to all of you while I'm here. That move there made the mulattoes and the blacks come together as a unit against the French.
On the island of Cuba, for some historically unique reason, these dogs had been bred to chase down Africans. And in fact, some of those dogs were imported to North America to chase down Africans. And some of those dogs wound up in Hispaniola to chase down Africans.
And these are the dogs they would send out to chase down black people whose only meal was the flesh of black human beings.
Because one of the things European pseudo-historians have done is, one, said that the enslaved Africans massacred all the white people left on the island at the revolution, at the end of the revolution, which they did not. They massacred all the French, but the whites who fought with them, the Polish and the Germans, as it says expressly in their 1805 constitution, were not only not killed, were now classified as black people. They killed all of the French left on the island, 4,000 or 5,000 people. But these are the same French who just embarked on a war of extermination against them. And remember, there were still French troops on the island. They were just on the other half of the island, what now is the Dominican Republic. So it's not like France stopped posing a threat the moment they got their independence. In fact, not only were French troops in the other half of the island, they were agitating in the other half of the island. So this is the context in which that massacre takes place.
That's basically what the Haitian Revolution was about. Africans dying bravely, whether it was getting boiled, whether it was drowning, gas, shot, beheaded, burnt at the stake.
We had a culture where swording, fencing was a part of our culture. Lancing, using lances, was a part of our culture. Going back even to South Africa with the Zulu nation, when Shaka took a long lance and created this short lance, he created both a spear and a sword. And so that's a part of African culture, going all the way back to ancient Egypt.
A lot of them had military training in African traditions, people freshly arrived from Africa. And then they had the military training of fighting for their different colonial master against another colonial master. But a lot of the tactics they used were what today we'd call guerrilla warfare. They didn't fight in the way, they knew they couldn't defeat a European army of 20,000 people, 80,000 people. They've got much less sophisticated arms, they've got way more arms, etc. in a face-to-face European-style empire versus empire battle. So they used guerrilla warfare, they used raiding techniques.
Primarily, what you have is the people who know their ecology. If you've been to Haiti, Haiti has a terrain of hills and mountains and plateaus, and if you are the African, you live in that every day. You plant there, you till the grounds there, you hunt there, and so you master that terrain.
The sisters, in many ways, supplied the force, created the environment for the men to do what needed to be done. Sisters are very important to any revolution. In fact, ain't nobody having a revolution without women. In fact, if you think you're doing that, it's just a fight. It ain't a revolution.
Sonny Belair, for instance, when they caught her, her husband was General Charles Belair, right? And he negotiated for her release. And you know, these white settlers, they never, you know, they betray whatever. They have no honor, okay? So when he gave himself up, they took both of them, okay? So that's Sanique Belair and Charles Belair, the general. And so they sentenced her to a beheading because she was a woman, and then they sent him to get shot. And she refused. She said, I will die the honorable way with my husband. They wanted to blindfold her. And she said, no, you don't need to blindfold me because I'm a woman.
When they ordered to take her head and put it under, they fought and fought with her and couldn't do it. And in the end, she gave the orders. Soldiers, position. Don't make me wait. Fire!
The Haitian leaders understood that it would not be conducive to them to try to get individual gains to the detriment of the collective society. So they were smart enough to understand, I'm not going to try to get little trinkets for myself while everybody else is suffering under this oppressive system. Enough of them understood that, because in any society you're going to have collaborators, but enough of them understood that we cannot collaborate with these white supremacists because it's not going to be beneficial to us collectively.
Yeah, the Haitian Revolution, the Africans are given a bad rep. These are people who were enslaved. As far as I'm concerned, if you want to own me and buy and sell my children, I'm well within my rights to do absolutely anything to get free from you. And I think all of us looking back 2 centuries hence can see that. If someone tried to sell your children, what would you do? You'd do anything you could do to stop them selling your children. And any self-respecting human would. Why should it be any different 2 centuries ago?
Toussaint Louverture opened the pathway for freedom and independence. But the man who doesn't get enough credit for bringing the revolution to victory is Jean-Jacques Dessalines.
two different characters, two different people who handle things differently, two different spirit, I would say also. Because if we take it in our own worldview, in the Voodoo worldview, when you analyze Toussaint, Toussaint is a Legba. Legba is the spirit that comes to open the way and trace the road. When you analyze Dessalines, Dessalines is an Ogu. That's the one who comes to make things happen by any means necessary.
But it's also really interesting how people like Jean-Jacques Dessalines become a military genius within the space of 10 or 15 years, with no formal military training in the way that we understand it. And that's one of the inexplicable things. But again, it comes down to human intelligence and the human capacity for genius and desire to be free.
Dessalines is definitely not Dahomey. I am certain of it. But it is a Dahomean woman who taught him Yoruba and taught him how to fight, how to do his Tantoya, who raised him. And not just any woman, it was a military woman, because Dahomey had two armies, a female army and a male army. And this woman was an officer in the female army of Dahomey when she was captured and brought into slavery. So she went right into work to raise some of the young ones that she, in a certain way, adopted. And Dessalines seemed to have been her prized.
Tantoya is significant because she taught the greatest hero to ever live how to do hand-to-hand combat when he was a teenager, how to shoot. She taught him everything he knew, because he was enslaved. But she had come from a warrior background.
I don't recall seeing anywhere where Toussaint was beaten, whereas Dessalines was constant. His entire back was whooped with scars that healed and hurt again and healed, and huge big blobs of scars all over his back.
And Dessalines, as opposed to Toussaint, did not have the love of the French military. He had a deep understanding of the European exploitation. He also had a deep understanding of the ruthlessness of the various European populations when they were taking out vengeance on the African population.
See, the difference between Toussaint and Dessalines, Toussaint wanted to make deals with the white supremacists. Toussaint felt he was a military man. He had some kind of camaraderie with the French. He felt that he could make deals. He was somewhat one of them. They would respect him as a military man, and that was his downfall. Now, Dessalines, he knew, and he's really the only modern African leader who understood that you cannot make deals with terrorists. You can't make deals with white supremacy. White supremacy is the ultimate form of terrorism. And Dessalines was the only person who was smart enough to realize that, and he got all the white supremacists off the island.
That's the story. So he was enslaved African. He was definitely beaten a lot. He ended up being bought by a free black man. So, those assimilated Negroes could do some good things if they want. His name was Jean-Baptiste Dessalines, the free black man who bought him and gave him his freedom. But Dessalines never forgot what slavery was about.
So what Dessalines did is, you buried alive 500 Africans, he hung 500 French. For everything that Rochambeau did, Dessalines did the same thing.
Add up all of those different characteristics, the topography, the geography, the guerrilla warfare, the use of arson, etc., you begin to understand how and why the Africans on the island were able to prevail.
At the end of the war, it was really bloody. And I think there was a point in time where Rochambeau had killed thousands, and he matched them, like head for head.
I mean, one of the raids I've learned about was a raid Dessalines undertook where they raided a French camp with just machetes. Now imagine you're a heavily armed French camp, and a bunch of dudes walks into your camp with just machetes and chop you up. The level of bravery and arrogance almost that takes to go and face the French with just machetes.
The other piece to remember is you have St. Lucia, Tobago, and Martinique. Those are other three islands that the French are reinstating the enslavement process. And what the Haitian people are doing and Dessalines are doing is he's watching that and he's saying, look, it won't be long. If they can get those surrounding islands back where they were years ago, then they're going to come over here next. So Dessalines, he said straight out, he said, we are going to take care of these cannibals.
The British Army came here in 1801 with over 30,000 soldiers, and saying that it didn't want to waste too much time, wanted to do a rapid operation, and in less than a couple of weeks was going to take over the island. Well, he didn't know there was a man here called Jean-Jacques Dessalines. Toussaint Louverture was there too, but the main man on the ground was Dessalines. And sure enough, they had to leave on the ground. As they run back to their boats, they had to leave 25,000 troops on the ground. And that's the largest loss of the British Army in the entire America.
A lot of the Haitians came from places like Angola. When we think of Angola, we hear about capoeira. Capoeira is one of the fighting styles. Now, capoeira, people think that it's Brazilian. Capoeira is not Brazilian. As a matter of fact, the Portuguese banned capoeira from Brazil up until the 1930s because they didn't want those Africans using that, because the Africans were using that to free themselves in Brazil, beating the Portuguese. You had brothers like Zumbi, who was from Angola, and they were using the OG capoeira. The capoeira that we know now is watered down because it's based on an oral tradition, because they burned the books and the instruction manuals and got rid of those down in Brazil because they knew that Africans getting a hold of that knowledge, that was very dangerous. So a lot of those African fighting skills, like capoeira, these are old African systems that we transfer to each other, and many of the Haitians, they tap back into those fighting skills. Stick fighting, capoeira, different types of African martial arts, and these were the skills they used to beat the French off them.
The Haitians had a certain resilience about them, you know, where they applied science a lot of times, and science is very strong, you know, so there's powders that are created, and these powders are not gunpowders, but if you spit it in someone's face, there's ways to numb them. And this is all science.
So our brothers and sisters in Haiti had an understanding of nature where they used nature. They knew how to use weather. They knew how to use the trees to cover themselves, to hide themselves. And when all the forces would come in, they would come down on just brute force. The martial arts that they brought from Africa, the fighting systems that they brought from Africa, the ability to make weapons out of wood and stick.
Once again, you have this small island of black people with the population probably not exceeding 500,000 at its highest point. And it's surrounded by antagonists, not only in the Caribbean, but actually worldwide, in a sense, to the extent that European powers had their tentacles globally. And so this was not a time for revolutionary leader of Africans to be pussyfooting around, shall we say.
Being a military is not just about weapons. It's much more. You have to be spiritually, you have to be a military. You have to know how to treat people. You have to learn how to heal, because you're going to hurt, you're going to kill. You must do to heal so it will balance your soul. So there are a lot of things involved in the training of Dessalines, but you have to be clear. And Dessalines was very clear that slavery was no child's play. And slavers didn't care for us. They care more for a stone on the ground than any breathing people that look like us.
They spared no one who was fighting against them, as any soldier should do. And so the Africans proved to be extraordinarily good swordsmen. They were extraordinary with using lances, or what we call spears, and they learned very quickly how to be extraordinary using a rifle. And so we defeated the French straight up and hands down.
One of the really interesting things when you examine the French testimony is the frustration that the French particularly had with this tactic. They complain about it, they call it cowardice or whatever else, but then in other places, when the time was right, you hear French soldiers talking about a guy jumped down the cannon today. And these are the people we have to fight. The sheer terror of, like, we're fighting people who've decided now liberty or death. They've decided they are willing to die for their freedom. And this is one of the most fascinating questions about any revolution, but about the Haitian Revolution in particular. What makes people decide at this point, we're now willing to die for an idea, but we weren't yesterday? And you see this behavior. You see people being burnt and tortured, laughing at it. You see people recklessly risking their life. Battle of Vertier, if you look at the French testimony of that final battle, the African behavior in that battle, we would say, was so militarily reckless, i.e. they were so willing to die for their freedom, that the French stopped the battle in the middle to congratulate them and say, listen, we've never seen people die like this.
By the time Dessalines rises, circa 1803, circa 1804, the revolution is pretty far down the road, and he had learned the lessons that had ensnared Toussaint and was not about to be arrested and detained by supposed negotiators in good faith.
Not only were women very active, there are lots of children active in the fight. Children who made their names. And, you know, as looking out for, climbing on top of trees to look out for what's happening and alerting.
Most Africans who was fighting in Haiti were like first, at most, second generation from Africa. So they still had the African martial arts skills as a part of their repertoire in terms of fighting.
And then, of course, there are other kinds of tactics. Arson was very successful. Of course, arson was very successfully used by the enslaved Africans in North America as well. That was one of the major tools in our toolkit right here in North America. And at a certain point, the European colonizers had to make a judgment as to whether or not it was worthwhile to continue to endure losses, that is to say, deaths, in trying to subdue these revolutionaries, when it's not clear that even if you did triumph, you would inherit a charred and burned landscape.
Bonaparte sends this huge armada, thinking, we're gonna get rid of these people, right? But they try to use ruse. That's the other thing. The Haitians really knew how to use ruse, right? They would do all kinds of things like keep changing their clothes and going around to make as if they had more people than they had, stuff like that. Or, you know, the Europeans loved, you know, sleeping with black women or whatever. They never thought that these black women would go back and tell the African warriors what was going on. They used everything that was in their hands.
Napoleon's campaign against the Haitians, it was a racial agenda. Napoleon specifically stated that he did not want a black republic. We cannot have a black republic. This thing was completely racial.
French writers, a lot of French writers were like, there must be some white person behind this. It's the abolitionists' fault. It's this person's fault. It's those guys who stirred up something else. There was this constant blaming of so-called white agitators.
Dessalines, Toussaint, they didn't kill every white person on the island. That's a misconception. We were in war, and we were slaves. And within this slave, we had to fight for our independence. And in this process, you still had certain whites that were with the Haitians.
And so they create this model constitution, but they apply it to the circumstance of Haiti. So they say, no plantations can exist. No white folks can own land. But they realize that all white folks are not the same, and so they have a special compensation for Polish white folks who joined their revolution and helped them to defeat the French.
At the end of the war, once the victory against France had happened, what Dessalines said to them, that because of the horrific genocide you've meted out against my people, you've got to go. You can't stay. He accepted their surrender. 7,000 of them surrendered and was pulled out of the country and went back home. The officers under Rochambeau and the others, who he got a ship for them, fully equipped the ship, and let them go home free. But his request was, all of you go home, okay? Can't stay here. The only people that can stay is the Italians and the Polish who fought with us, and the Germans who did not lift any arms against us.
after trying everything and couldn't get off the island. So then he had to come in front of Dessalines. And according to his own journal, he said, Dessalines was magnanimous. He complimented him. He said, you're a good soldier, even if you've lost. They're supposed to give their sword to the winner. He says, no, keep your sword. You're a good soldier. I don't need your sword. I got my own. And so he's, what are you going to do to me? He says, nothing. I'm going to send you back to France. And your task will be to let them know never to set foot on this island again.
What's really significant about this, Aline, is that Rochambeau told everybody, I'm going to get that Negro. I'm going to do all kinds of heinous things to him. But when the Haitians won at Vertières on November 18th, 1803, he didn't kill Rochambeau. He let him go. And I think that's really significant.